Hi there and welcome to a new episode of Extreme Banding, the slow YouTube camera channel dealing with various photographic nightmares. I am living in one of them right now, December in the north of Sweden. Weather is so-so and the sun never rises. There's no time or place for photography, so what can you do? Think about which all-mechanical rangefinder camera with a cost below 1,000 euros you would like to use for the rest of your life, perhaps.
Minolta started rangefinder camera production in 1947. Since this was after the war and Leica's patents had been voided, they could copy the pre-war Leicas freely. They did, however, choose to make their own design. This is the Minolta 35 Model E, released in 1951, and the earlier bodies of the Minolta 35 had looked quite similar. The Minolta 35 has a combined viewfinder rangefinder with 0.7 times magnification and an effective base length of about 28 millimeters.
The viewfinder of the Minolta 35, 0.7 times magnification, pretty bright, easy to focus, a nice finder.
They also added a hinged back, which you release like that. Pretty bright pressure plate, may have faded over time. Anyhow, one special thing about Minolta's early cameras is that the frame size is smaller than most other 35mm cameras. Initially the frame size was 24x32, but by time of the Model E this had increased to 24x34. The standard 24x36 was really just realized by chance, as that was just what Oskar Barnack had at hand when making the first 35mm camera, which did not look exactly like this, but similar at least. But 24x32 is actually a better aspect ratio, and Nikon and Minolta tried to push this early on. But as Kodak had standardized 24x36, they were too powerful and the American market too important, so eventually Nikon and Minolta had to succumb to the 24x36 standard. With the advent of digital this could have been corrected, but for some reason only compact cameras, Olympus and Panasonic, did something about it. You also have these medium format cameras who do 4x3, but we're stuck in Oskar Barnack's mistake of the 3:2 aspect ratio. But in this day and age, if you develop yourself and don't rely on automatic cutting mechanisms, this could be an advantage if you would get 40 images from a roll instead of 36. But unfortunately I don't think you'd do that with the Minolta 35 Model E. It seems like they have just increased the space between the frames, so the only thing you end up with is more wasted film. The Minolta 35 was better than a Barnack aspect ratio wise, but when it comes to camera design I think they would have been better off taking some pointers from the Leicas. The Minolta 35 is a heavy camera. The dimensions are decent though. It measures 136x76x32, that is the grip, but it weighs in at 566 grams, so weighs as much as some of the bigger rangefinder cameras. The addition and placement of the slow speed dial and self-timer along with the weight makes the camera a bit uncomfortable to hold. If you have it like this, you don't get a stable grip, and you have to almost grip these dials to get a decent grip. Adding to that, this strap plug is pretty sharp and kind of digs into your hand on the right side. The shutter sound is very nice though, and maybe because of the mass of the camera, but it is very silent. If we compare it to the Leica 2 Model E here, with this different lens but same shutter speed, don't know how evident it is when recording it like this, but in real life I would say there's a clear difference in favor of the Minolta. On later versions they added a winding lever, but here the E still has a knob. This camera feels a bit dry, but with some service I think it would be an excellent winder. The dials are nice, easy to change shutter speed. You have a rewind knob here. So a combined viewfinder rangefinder, which is quite nice, and a hinged back, as well as a silent shutter. But that's about it. Otherwise this camera is not Barnack class. And adding to that, I've not been able to mount any of my other screw mount lenses on this camera. I do not know why, but they kinda just are, it's not possible to screw them in. This lens fits on other screw mount bodies, however. So I don't know if it's something just with this copy or if there are compatibility issues. So the lens is 45 millimeters, since aspect ratio is a bit different, but if you want external viewfinders, there are from compact cameras, there are some 28 and 35 millimeter viewfinders with other aspect ratios than 3:2. The last version of the Minolta 35 was introduced in 1958 and production ceased 1 year later in 1959, the year when most rangefinders disappeared. Minolta mostly focused on SLRs thereafter, but in parallel to the Minolta 35 they released an independent leaf shutter system camera called the Minolta Super A. I had read a lot of good things about this camera, but still it surprised me. It is still a 50s Minolta, so very heavy and not that great to hold, but it has some kind of magic. The important things for me when it comes to rangefinder cameras are ergonomics, winding and viewfinder. If we start with the ergonomics, the viewfinder is pretty central, which is not ideal, but works quite okay, probably because of the sloping sides. As with almost all leaf shutter cameras, the lens is placed in the middle, which gives little room for gripping with your right hand. The flash sync selector also has pretty sharp teeth. Your little finger meets a not too comfortable bump on the bottom, and your middle finger wants to cover the rangefinder window, and at the same time, your ring finger might wear against these teeth. So a bit of a baptism of fire using the Super A or gripping it. And this is not made easier since it is quite heavy. It weighs 628 grams without lens and measures 140 × 83 × 37. So this far things are not looking good for the Super A. One thing to remember regarding weight though is that the focusing helicoid is included in the camera body. So the lenses in themselves are quite small. As they are 50s Minoltas though, they are still quite heavy. So you mount and unmount them. They have instructions on the lens, which is very nice. This says off. So you press this to lock it, then you just turn it like that and it's off. And as you see, it's a pretty deep lens, very small to the surface. And then you have this helicoid. You can put on the 50 then. And then what you do is, first you have to align these dots here. And then you have a sign that says on. So you put them there in the middle and you twist it to on. And then you have to see that it this has to jump in. Then you can just start using it. It becomes a little front heavy with this lens on, since it is quite heavy. The focusing system is pretty nice. It has a very good throw, not too long, not too short. It is comfortable to have the exact same focusing with all lenses. The shutter speed selector is a bit of an oddity. It's up here, and this was made so there's an auxiliary light meter you can put here, which connects to the cogs here. But I mean, this works just fine having it up here. Top speed is 1/400th of a second though, so it's not that fast. The difference to 1/500 is not that great though, so it's doable. As it is a leaf shutter camera with metal blades, you never have to worry about leaving the lens cap off in the sun or having uneven exposures. Flash sync at all speeds is a bonus, even if the top speed could have been shorter. You have speeds down to 1 second. So leaf shutters are usually very silent, but the Super A does make a bit of a noise. Here we will compare it to the Agfa Ambi Silette, also with a 35mm lens here. So let's set the speed to 100 there and 125 there. So Minolta Super A, Ambi Silette. Even though it is a leaf shutter, it is not too silent. You can see the Minolta 35. In that way, it is not a clear advantage. It has a hinged back with some nice features, and it has this rewind crank that is nice. But you may wonder, after all of this, what makes me say that this camera is one of the more enjoyable I have tested. First off, it is built to a very high standard. You can just feel it. And second, it is the winding. This lever wind is one of the best I have tried. There's just something about it. The gears moving and that click at the end. It makes you feel as if something substantial has just occurred, that the next image you're gonna take is going to be world class. Hard to describe really, has to be felt. We also have to mention this Leica M3 style auto resetting exposure counter. The next thing is the viewfinder. With approximately 0.58 times magnification and 26.1mm effective base length.
This is the viewfinder of the Minolta Super A, 0.58 times magnification. You see you have non-parallax corrected frame lines for 50mm, and then you have the whole frame for 35. And when you have the 35mm lens mounted, you don't see it in the finder at all. It might be hard to see like this, but this finder is truly a beauty. You kinda just want to live in this viewfinder. It makes the world look better than it is in real life. They could have added some kind of parallax markings to the 50 frame, but this is what we have. A very, very nice viewfinder.
As this is a closed system, we also have to take the lenses into account. There is this 35 f3.5 lens that is very small. Makes the camera from front to back one of the smallest in its class. The Ambi Silette also has a very small lens, and as you can see in this dimension they are quite similar with the lenses mounted. If we would simulate, we can take this, the CLE here coming up. It has the Orion 15, which is a 28mm lens, but it is 2 centimeters deep. With that mounted, as you can see, they are almost the same. This is a bit lower, but the difference is not that big. So you get a pretty compact package for 35mm shooting. The rest of the camera is quite big though, and you won't get away from the weight. There are 3 50mm lenses for it, a small f2.8 lens, which I haven't tried, and a 50 f2, and then the one I have, the super-rokkor f1.8, which is a spectacular lens, but heavy. There are also 85, 100 and 135mm lenses, but those are pushing the effective base length a bit. Is this camera better than a Barnack? I would say no. It is just too big and awkward to hold in comparison. But if you see one, I would advise you to pick it up. You don't have to use it really. Just wind and fire the shutter. Look at things through the viewfinder. It is a camera that makes you happy, and that is a pretty special thing. You would think that Minolta were through with rangefinder cameras at that point, but in 1973 they made a comeback with the Leica CL, which they produced for the Germans. But as it does not wear the Minolta name, we will cover that separately. In 1981, Minolta released their last rangefinder camera, the Minolta CLE. This is an electronically controlled camera, so disqualified for this series, but rules are made to be broken. This camera will not work at all without batteries, and if the electronics fail, it could be difficult to repair. On the upside, as long as it works, shutter times will be correct, and fully mechanical cameras are quite expensive to maintain if you want to keep them in perfect working condition. Anyhow, the CLE is a pretty small camera, measuring 127 times 79 times 31, you know where you grip it, 31 millimeters, and weighing in at 383 grams, a lightweight camera. Compared to the Leica CL, which has the shutter speed dial here, the shutter speed dial has moved to a better place here and is very, flush to the camera. And other improvements compared to the CL is that even though it is tight, you can actually mount deep lenses on this one. So, just to show you how tight it is, there's some parts there but it doesn't touch them, and you can collapse collapsible lenses here as well, even if it is really tight. The downside is that with this Jupiter 12, for example, it will interfere with the metering. It shows underexposure, and I don't think it is really consistent. You can use it in all manual mode if you like. Collapsibles are no problem, of course, as they don't interfere with the metering when you use them. What it has kept from the CL is the nice winding mechanism and the well-dampened shutter sound. The viewfinder is also improved, in my opinion. It has a 0.58 times magnification, an effective base of 28.8 millimeters, and there are frame lines for 40 and 28 millimeters. To find a rangefinder camera with 0.58 times magnification and 28 millimeter frame lines, you kind of have to go to the very expensive Leica M's, who are specially made with this, or for even lower magnification, the Bessa R4, which is very expensive also. So it's the cheapest one you can get by far in that regard. The frame lines, they are selected by the lens you mount. I find that a bit of a drawback. I like the Bessa style where you can change frame lines yourself, but it's okay.
This is the viewfinder of the Minolta CLE. As you can see, very big viewfinder, 0.58 times magnification, and here you can see the 40mm frame lines in the center and the 28mm in the edges. Very easy to see. The 40mm frame lines, the 28mm frame lines are also quite easy to see, but you don't see anything around them at all. And so you can see the 40, you don't have any corners on it, just lines in the center parts, up and down and to the sides. Personally, I prefer to have some kind of corners. So a bit dull viewfinder perhaps, but perfectly fine. It's not the best, but it's very, very usable. So, and that's the view when you have only the 28mm frame lines.
It would of course have been nice with built-in frame lines for 35 and 50 millimeters, but you can't have everything. And this camera is quite comfortable to use with an auxiliary finder. And the rangefinder patch is very clear and easy to use, so it's very easy to switch between focusing and external finder if you want. Otherwise you can just do 28 and 40 and be happy with that, of course. If you want modern lenses, Voigtlander has released a small 28 and 40 just now. They do cost some money, but at least there are options. One of the drawbacks, metering only works in aperture priority mode, so if you go all manual you need to just use Sunny 16 external meter or switch between aperture priority and manual if you want a reading. So that is not ideal, but at the same time, if you get this kind of camera, maybe it's better to just let go. Set it to aperture priority. Let the camera decide the exposure settings when it comes to shutter speed and just focus on the image. Compared to a Barnack, well, of course, as you can see, they are two different beasts. One is very small and elegant, the other is pretty small, less elegant. But I must say, this is still kind of perfect in hand. Maybe not as perfect as this one. And you won't get this, feel of all the cogs and everything moving around in there. But at the same time, I can't complain about this camera. I think it's fun to use. It's kind of, careless in use. You don't have to worry that much about anything, as long as it works. I would say these are two totally different types of cameras. For an electronically controlled camera, I think this is just, it still has a lot of charm. Let's compare the shutter sound of these different Minolta cameras, just for fun. So you can see here 3 generations of Minoltas. Here's the 35, the CLE, and the Super A. So the 35 is clearly the most silent one. This one has the shortest, throw here, and fastest, of course, for winding film, while this one is the most charming when it comes to winding, but the loudest, even though it has a leaf shutter. To conclude about the CLE, I would say that if you can handle the pressure from aging electronics, which could render your camera worthless in a heartbeat, the Minolta CLE is one of the nicest there is. It is also one of the few rangefinder cameras below 1,000 euros, even if you have to look a bit to find it at that price, with modern built-in metering. I would say this is a really good buy, and it's just a very fun camera to shoot. So, Minolta, most of the time heavy, but always unique.